Odin. A Paranormal Protector Tale. Book 3 in the Heart of Ice series. Written by Demelza, Carlton. 26. Odin closed the last book, and slipped through the walls to return it to its shelf. He'd taken to traveling this way in order to avoid Freyja, and the temptation that came with being too close to her. Oh, he watched over her, and if she called for help, he could be almost instantly by her side, but the more he read, the more certain he became of two things. Firstly, that so much had changed in the world while he'd been asleep, that it would take him a lifetime to learn enough to live in the world as it was now. Secondly, that he had no hope of defending Freyja from all the things he barely understood in this world, so he definitely didn't deserve the title of being her protector at all. And if he could not protect her, then he did not deserve to share her bed. No matter how much he longed to. For if he lost her the way he'd lost Frigg, Vali and Vidar, he could not live with himself. He had to tell her. He'd promised to protect her, and if he failed to keep that promise, he needed to ask her to release him from his obligation, so that she might find a modern man, from her own time, who could protect her as she deserved, and love her as she deserved. Not just the latter. Odin took a deep breath and marched into the feasting hall where Freyja usually was at this time of day, eating a salty sweet flatbread, topped with something pink and yellow. "Would you like a slice of pizza?" she asked, pushing the platter toward him. Odin shook his head. "I am not hungry." He almost wished it were not so that he might share a meal with her, or share every meal with her, but this was part of the curse Eric's witch had cast on him. A spell that should have made him strong enough to protect the woman he loved from anything, except a future no one could have foreseen. Freyja smiled sadly. "You're just being polite, aren't you? No one else likes pineapple on their pizza, either. There's still plenty of other kinds in the freezer. Pepperoni, supreme, and maybe even a couple of the Moroccan lamb ones that are way too spicy for me. I might switch it up a bit and try something else tomorrow though. Having the same pizza every day, even when it's my favorite, can be a bit much. Then again, I'm sure I'll miss it next week, when I'm not here anymore." If Odin's heart had still been beating, it would have stood still in his chest. "You are leaving?" "Not willingly. But when the police arrive on Monday morning and they discover the body's missing, they'll arrest me for sure." As her story spilled out, some of it the same things she'd said the other night, and some of it entirely new, he began to understand more of it. These police would bring her to face justice for the loss of the body in the cold storage chamber. His body, and his fault it was missing. Not hers. She would be exiled, maybe for a short time, but most likely for much longer, and not allowed to return to her work here. He'd placed her life and her livelihood at stake, simply by answering her call for help. If he'd only had the sense to ignore her call, to acknowledge that he was such a poor protector, that another man would be better suited to help her, she would not be in this predicament. This was his fault, yet she would be the one to suffer for it. Just like Frigg. He had to fix this. Find a way to set things right. Before the police came to take her away. If he only had the courage to do it. He stared at her, allowing himself to feel all the longing he'd pushed down deep inside over the last few days. He would do anything for Freyja. But he would wait until she fell asleep. He'd steal one more evening of her time, before he gave her up forever. "What are your plans for this evening?" Freyja asked. He swallowed. Oh, he was such a coward. "I'd hoped I might spend this evening with you." Her eyes lit up. "Wonderful. You see, I have this list, and there are a couple of things on it I'd like your help with." Odin inclined his head. "Whatever you wish, I am yours to command. For one last night." 27. Whatever she wished. Freyja couldn't suppress a little shiver of anticipation at those words. She couldn't remember anyone saying them to her before. Not even when she'd gotten top marks in her final exams at high school, giving her a university entry rank that would allow her to choose any university course she wanted, as long as it was medical, like the rest of her family. After her brother had chosen dentistry instead of medicine, saying it had better hours and better money, World War III had still raged in their household for weeks, followed by a Cold War that still erupted every Christmas. She hadn't expected to be home for Christmas this year, but now. Freyja sighed. Before she could really let her imagination run wild and start wishing, she had to know the truth. She took a deep breath. First, I need to ask you one question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. There's no chance you sort of accidentally took a body from the necropsy fridge, and maybe just buried it in the snow outside, and then sort of forgot where you put it, right? Because if you did, and you happen to find it again while you're clearing out the courtyard, and put the body back in the fridge, no one else would ever know. Her voice got a bit squeaky at the end, as desperation crept in. If the body came back, she wouldn't need her pre-prison bucket list, and everything could go back to normal. Sure, she wouldn't be able to sleep with Olaf again, but… Olaf's huge hands clasped her shoulders. Firm and reassuring, but still gentle. Dr. Freyja, you are absolutely right. There are no bodies buried outside in the snow, forgotten or otherwise. But I promise you, I will do everything in my power to help you find the one you are looking for, so that, as you say, no one will ever know it was missing. Sincerity beamed out of his one blue eye, almost electric in its intensity. She'd known he wasn't a thief, but that he believed he could find the body when she'd all but given up. Maybe that was why he was the one person she'd miss most about this place. Because if she could choose to be snowed in or trapped on a deserted island with anyone again, she'd choose Olaf in a heartbeat. Which was why she was determined to seduce him into her bed one more time, before the police dragged her away from Icelab. She'd never seduced a man in her life, and was pretty certain she'd do a pretty clumsy job of it, but if she had only one wish. Want to share a bottle of champagne with me? The words came out of her mouth before she could stop them. Olaf shook his head slowly. I do not drink. Of course he didn't. A man with a body like his evidently treated it like a temple. No pizza, no pancakes, no alcohol. For him, all-night incredible sex was probably just another workout. Unless he was a reformed alcoholic, which wouldn't be unreasonable, after he'd lost his kid. Either way, she shouldn't have mentioned the champagne. The last time she'd drunk champagne was the night Amal had ruined her life. Which meant she'd have to try and seduce him sober, which was going to be even worse and probably wouldn't work, and she'd go to prison still wanting, with all the things on her bucket list unticked, and… Olaf captured her mouth with his. And Freyja forgot how to breathe. 28. Please, she moaned as he broke the kiss for only a moment to scoop Freyja up in his arms. Then he was kissing her again, as he strode through the corridors, to the scriptorium she'd made her bedchamber. He'd studied the maintenance manual, so that he might master the controls of the box on the wall, turning up the temperature until it resembled a summer's day instead of the depths of winter in here. He started to help her out of her clothing, but the moment her breasts were bare, he could not help himself. He laid her down on the bed, so that he had both hands free to caress her. Silken softness itself as always, except for her nipples, which were almost as hard as his own stone skin. Gods, and the taste! She arched her back up, offering herself to him, as he took his time on first one breast, then the other, and he couldn't seem to stop his fingers from stroking her. And the way she whimpered that one word, please, over and over. Gods, he could not refuse her anything. Instead, he would give her everything, and more. She fumbled at the fastenings of her trousers, and Odin read her intention, as though the picture had popped from her mind to his. He slid his hands down her back, into the back of her trousers, cupping the sweet globes of her ass, before squeezing just a little. Another moan, another please, before he tugged off her trousers entirely, baring her whole body to him. A small part of him wanted to thrust inside her and stay there until dawn, but he was too obsessed with the taste of her to do that just yet. No, he knelt between her thighs, lifting her legs over his shoulders as he bowed over her, kissing her in the one place he longed for most. More heavenly than even Valhalla. He tasted her with his lips, then with his tongue, before taking his hands to spread her out before him, so that he might explore every fold, every sensitive spot, as she moaned and squirmed beneath him. "Oh please," she begged. Slowly, he coaxed her to her first orgasm of the evening, pausing to taste her again and again as she grew wetter, her cries wilder. Finally, as he felt her clench around his fingers, he drank her very essence, as she cried out to the gods in ecstasy. Sweeter than the finest mead, yet salty too, as the best meads always were. Intent on wringing more pleasure from her begging body, he dipped his head so that he might drink again. 29. Freyja might have sucked a couple of cocks in her life, but she'd never had a man go down on her. And Olaf, God, he was as good with his tongue as he was with the rest of his gorgeous body. If she had one wish, it would be to ride his face for eternity, but right now, he had her pinned to the bed, his face buried between her thighs, completely in control while she had none, and she wasn't sure what she liked more. Especially when a second orgasm quickly followed the first, and a third one threatened to overwhelm her completely. Oh God, he was going to give her a fourth. And a fifth. She screamed and bucked and begged for more, taking everything he gave, while he drank her in, teasing and torturous and so fucking divine she wished this night could last forever. After more orgasms than she thought her body could take, she blinked away her bliss from her umpteenth climax, to find him staring down at her, desire burning in his eyes, now completely naked. And his cock was, well, fucking massive, that was for sure. Almost bigger than she remembered, which made no sense, because it had fitted fine inside her before. Very fine, in fact. He pulled her up so she straddled his lap, his cock rubbing her folds, yet still not inside her. "Please, Olaf. Please," she begged, grinding herself against him. Another orgasm shouldn't even be possible, and yet she could feel the pleasure building. From that glint in his eye, she knew he felt it too. He fastened his hands around her hips, pressing her down harder, still not entering her. "Come for me, Freyja," he ordered. Suddenly she felt like she'd drunk the whole bottle of champagne anyway, pleasure bubbling up inside her until she couldn't help but scream. And Olaf rewarded her, giving her every inch of his considerable cock, until he was buried in her to the hilt, stretching her to her very limits. Or maybe even past them, she wasn't sure. Fuck. Fuck, she moaned, trying to adjust to his girth while still holding on to the last wisps of euphoria from that last orgasm. Then he began to move inside her, glacial thrust after glacial thrust, though his touch was anything but icy. Setting her on fire from the inside out, with one hand burning against her hip, and the other branding her ass. And his mouth was everywhere, her throat, her breasts, her lips, before he took one of her nipples in his teeth, biting down just hard enough to make her yelp before sucking hard to soothe the sting. And his cock? Fuck, she'd thought earlier that she'd like to ride his face, now, she wanted to sit in his lap forever. Impaling herself on him over and over, until the impossible happened. Another orgasm, building bigger than anything she'd ever known before, tonight or otherwise, threatening to carry her away, to bury her entirely, and she didn't care what it did, as long as Olaf didn't stop moving his massive cock, and oh fuck. Before words left her altogether. 30. Sometime after midnight, Odin knew they should stop. Freyja was exhausted, so drunk on pleasure, she could not sit upright in his lap anymore if he did not support her, so he laid her down on the pillows, trying to memorize the sight of her blissful face so that he would never forget this night. "Don't stop. Please don't stop," she begged. He leaned forward to kiss her. "I'd happily make love to you forever and never stop, but you need sleep." She grabbed his ass, squeezing the cheeks with surprising strength. "I can sleep when tonight's over. Right now all I need is you." Odin wanted to tell her she deserved so much more. A man who could protect her, who would put her needs before his own selfish ones, who had not almost cost her livelihood, but buried in her wet heat, as he was right now, he could not resist her. So he made love to her languidly, as though they had all the time in the world, while dawn crept irrevocably closer. One final orgasm shuddered through her body, as her eyelids drooped. "I love you," she mumbled as her eyes slid shut. Odin's heart shattered within his chest, stone shards piercing his insides. "Not as much as I love you," he whispered, gently disengaging from her irresistible depths. He dropped one final kiss on her slightly parted lips, before gathering his things and heading to his own resting place. He left the strange garment with Olaf's name on it, neatly folded on the same metal table where he'd found it. He'd already tipped the water out of the long tray that now only held his spear, but now he paused by the sink so that he must wash one more time as was proper. When he was clean, he opened the door of the cold storage room, barely feeling the chill as the air clouded around him. The tray on the wheeled table was cool against his skin, and long enough for him to stretch out to his full length, though his toes grazed the edge. This was what Freyja needed, he told himself. A 1,000-year-old Viking body in her cool room, not in her bed. For all that Odin wished it could be otherwise, he knew it could not. He could not. Instead, he recalled her words, her last order to him: "Put the body back in the fridge. No one will ever know." This was her command. As surely as her cry for help had awoken him, her voice was the lullaby that would send him back into slumber. Perhaps for another 1,000 years, and when he woke, no one would remember her name or his, like the history books of this time that did not mention himself or Eric or any of his men. But he would remember, and the memory would be his alone. Smiling, Odin drifted into oblivion. 31. When Freyja woke and stumbled to the bathroom, she could barely walk. She probably shouldn't have had quite that much sex with Olaf, but he'd been so damn good, and if it was the last time she ever got to, she'd be still riding him right now if he was here. She'd never met a man with that kind of stamina, never met a man who lasted more than 15 minutes, actually, let alone a dusk-till-dawn fuckfest that still left her aching for more. They had time. The police weren't supposed to arrive until Monday, so there was still the rest of the weekend. Maybe she could even entice Olaf into sharing a shower with her, she thought, as she endured the lukewarm spray alone. If she could find him. He'd left the library by the time she woke up, and he wasn't in the cafeteria either. The snow in the courtyard was starting to melt in the morning sun, she thought, or at least it looked like there was less of it, but there was no one else out there. It was almost like Olaf had left the lab entirely, which just wasn't possible. The driveway and the road all the way to the village were still as snowed in as ever, with no sign of shifting soon. Unless a burst of summer weather came over the mountains, and melted it all away. That would still take days though, time enough to do the last few things on her bucket list. She donned her outdoor gear and headed out into the courtyard, where she began to shape snowballs. One after the other, until she had a massive pile of them. Then she began to pelt the stupid sundial. The first few throws went wide or glanced off it, so she took a step closer, taking a second to aim before she let fly. When that one hit, the sundial rang faintly, like the echo of a bell. The faintest shadow of what Olaf could do, like trying to mop up a flood with a single tissue. It wasn't fair. The world was full of selfish assholes like Amal and Saint Nick, and whoever had stolen Carl's ice mummy. Why did she always have to take the blame for it? 3 snowballs hit the sundial, one after the other. Didn't she work every bit as hard, if not harder? She threw 2 snowballs this time, though only one hit the target. Didn't she deserve to be happy? The next one smashed against the plinth the sundial sat on, shattering into slush. Didn't she deserve to have a career? Pov. A hot man in her bed. Pov. And for things to go right for once? She threw missile after missile until she ran out of snowballs, and had to make a fresh pile. She threw those too, her aim growing steadily worse as it became harder and harder to see through the tears streaming down her face. She should probably go inside before they froze, or worse, Olaf came back from his morning run and saw her like this. He'd never touch her again if he knew what a fucking mess she was, compared to his hot perfection. Maybe it was best that she'd be forced to leave before he found out how much of a failure she really was. She'd fucked up everything else in her life. She was certain she'd fuck up a relationship with him too if they had one. It was only a matter of time. And seeing as he didn't drink, maybe she should go inside and have that bottle of champagne with breakfast. It wasn't like she could fuck things up any worse today. Freyja trudged back to the loading dock to shuck off her snow gear before padding in her socks to the cafeteria. 32. Thor, Loki, Odin. Come to my aid, for I have need of you. Odin stirred in his cold, metal bed. The call was faint, but familiar. Not Freyja's beloved voice, but another's. Another whose call was stronger, though further away. Thor, Loki, Odin, wake and ready for battle, for I need your help. It must be Eric's witch, the girl whose spell had sent him to sleep for 1,000 years. The one who'd cut out first Thor's heart, then Loki's. Yet if she was calling them, then they must still live. Eric had kept his promise. Odin would not have believed it possible, for everything he knew about the man told him he was faithless, with no honor to speak of. Perhaps he'd been wrong. Or perhaps it was the witch, and not Eric, honoring that promise. Odin had not known any witches, so he could not speak to their honor. But if she kept faithfully to the oath he had made, then so must he. He'd vowed to answer the summons when it came, and led his men to victory in Eric's name. Then again, more than 1,000 years had passed. Eric could not possibly still live. How then was the witch still alive? He had to answer. He had given his word. Eric might be faithless, but Odin still had some honor, for all his many mistakes. Thor, Loki, Odin, rise, for I summon you. No. Not yet, Odin thought. He had sworn to answer the summons, but he had never said when. He owed a debt to Freyja, too, who would be accused of theft if his body went missing before the police arrived. Therefore he must stay where he was, and return to his hibernation until he knew Freyja was safe. Then he might answer the witch's call. If she still called. Satisfied, Odin slipped back into slumber. 33. Freyja raised her head from the cafeteria table, wishing it wouldn't hurt so much. Had she really drunk the whole bottle of champagne last night? She lifted the bottle and peered blearily inside. Well, someone definitely had, and there was no sign of Olaf. At least she'd had the sense to have some cheese and crackers with it. But falling asleep on the plate of remaining cracker crumbs had not been part of her plan, because now she had crumbs stuck to her cheek, and it was going to take a good scrub in front of a mirror, or maybe a shower to get those off. Not to mention she needed something to sort her headache. Fuck. She stumbled toward the guest rooms, headed for hers. Faintly, she heard a rhythmic banging sound. It sounded like it came from behind one of the closed guest room doors. Which made no sense, because there was no one here but her and Olaf. Oh my God, Loki, a female voice cried, faint but clear enough to make out the words. Maybe someone had left their phone behind, and that was their ringtone. Either that, or Olaf was watching some sort of weird fantasy porn. If he was, she was definitely not walking in on that. Stumbling across her brother's porn collection had been horrifying enough. After all, she and her parents had believed him when he picked dentistry for the money and the hours. If she'd known there was a whole genre of kinky dentist porn out there, Freyja shuddered. She hadn't been able to stomach telling her parents. She grabbed clean clothes and some paracetamol and headed for the bathrooms. Only to see the most perfect ass she'd ever beheld, flexing for all it was worth, as its owner pounded into some dark-haired girl he had pinned to the wall. "Olaf," she whispered. Well, it had to be, didn't it? No one else was here. Except, where had the girl come from? Fuck, her head hurt more than ever. She stomped back to the cafeteria for some water to swallow the pills. A sensible person would probably just take her hangover to bed and sleep it off, but Freyja's building fury at Olaf wasn't going to let her rest until she'd kicked his absurdly hot ass. Had he lied to her? Did he have a way to get out of here, and was he or his new fuck buddy the body thief she'd been searching for all along? So she marched back to the bathroom, but had to slump down on the floor outside the door because her head hurt too much. She should have raided the medical supplies for something stronger than paracetamol. She was capable of injecting herself with a safe dose of something. Anything to make all this go away, at least for a few hours. The door opened, and a pair of hairy legs that ended in a towel wrapped around his hips swaggered out the door. Freyja scrambled to her feet. "You lying, cheating fucking bastard," she said, giving him a shove. Of course that only made her lose her balance, so she tumbled into his arms instead. Perfect fucking Olaf caught her before she could fall. Of course he did. "Sybil tells me I am a terrible liar, and it would be dishonorable to cheat," the man said, in a voice that definitely wasn't Olaf's. Freyja squinted up at him. He had long fair hair like Olaf, and just as many muscles, but he definitely had two eyes, with no eye patch to be seen. He was younger too, without the faint lines around his eye that Olaf had. He could have been Olaf's younger brother, maybe, but he wasn't Olaf. He grinned. But how can any man resist an invitation for fucking when it comes from a woman as enchanting as my wife? "Thor, who are you talking to?" The girl appeared at his side, combing her wet hair. She was even smaller than Freyja had thought. Freyja straightened, wincing as her head gave her a warning twinge. "I'm Dr. Freyja Valdis, the manager of this facility. Who are you and how did you get here? We've been snowed in for a week, nothing in or out. Unless you left a sleigh with reindeer in the courtyard." She just shook her head, then wished she hadn't. She was never drinking champagne again. Younger Olaf with two eyes clapped his hands. "That is exactly what I said as we were flying here. With so much snow, we should tame a couple of reindeer, but Sybil would not allow it. As her superior, with your permission, I could do it, and show Sybil exactly what she's missing." Sybil, that did sound familiar. Not that she was supposed to be here. "Sybil? Aren't you one of the expeditioners? One of the Harald Medal winners? Shouldn't you still be up in the mountains with Carl and the rest of his team?" But he'd said they'd flown, hadn't he? God, she'd slept through a helicopter landing. Never ever having champagne again. The girl grinned. "Yep, that's me. Ja runs around here too, but I think she's still in bed. Pretty sure she's awake though. When we head back to site, we should probably take an extra tent. I mean, I don't mind sharing with her when it's just the two of us, but with you two as well, it could get a bit crowded." Freyja blinked. So she hadn't imagined the noises she'd heard coming from that other guest room. Now she understood why Carl insisted on buying industrial-sized boxes of condoms for the supply room. These expedition teams bonked like rabbits. Of course she and Olaf had used their fair share, but Sybil waved her hand at the bathroom behind her, stirring up the steam into swirling eddies. Anyway, the bathroom's all yours if you want it. I'm volunteering for breakfast duty, because if we let Jerun do it, we'll end up with porridge or fish, and I for one am definitely sick of both of those. She marched off down the corridor like she knew exactly where she was going, with the nearly naked Thor trailing behind her. 34. The scent wafting out of the cafeteria lured Freyja, as surely as any mythical siren song. God, the place hadn't smelled this good since the end of expedition feast Lara had made at the end of last season. Had Lara come back too? But she found Sybil in the kitchen, with a now fully clothed Thor leaning against the wall, just watching her work. These are savory muffins. They don't need anything on them except maybe butter, egg or cheese, Sybil said, setting the tray of muffins on the bench. Thor held out the jar. That's only because you haven't tried them with lingonberry jam. It's perfect on bread or roast meat. You put smoked pork in those, yes? So the jam will go perfectly. Butter and jam, my sister would insist. Sybil rolled her eyes. Look, these muffins are made to my cousin's recipe. She runs the most amazing cafe back home and no one beats her breakfasts, or her muffins. And if she says they are good enough the way they are, no way am I taking advice from some backward Viking, who hasn't even tasted them. She turned to Freyja. Please tell this dude from the Dark Ages that we don't do weird shit like eat cheese and bacon muffins with jam. Thor folded his arms across his chest, just as stubborn as his wife. You only say that because you have not tasted it before. If you had, you would agree with me. My sister is undoubtedly eating fare just like this in Valhalla as we speak. I can't believe you'd bring your sister into this. Fine. I'll sacrifice one muffin to this stupidity. I'll cut it up into small pieces, so no one has to endure your jam-contaminated abomination for more than a single bite. We'll each take one bite with jam and one without. She lifted imploring eyes to meet Freyja's. You'll help me with this experiment, won't you? Additional data points and all that? Anything to get her hands on one of those muffins. All right, but I give you fair warning, I don't like lingonberry jam on anything. Sybil butchered and buttered the muffin, before Thor added a small dollop of jam to 2 pieces. I'll leave the jar here in case you want more, he said, looking smug. Sybil rolled her eyes again. Remind me again why I married you. Or hand-fasted, or whatever. Thor's smile grew even more smug, if that were possible. Because you love me. Sybil hooked her foot around a rubbish bin, and dragged it over to the bench. If this tastes as horrible as I think it will, no judgment if you spit it out. She grabbed one of the jam morsels, and motioned for Freyja to do the same. Why aren't you having any? Freyja asked, jerking her chin toward Thor. He might intimidate Sybil with his size, but Freyja almost matched him for height. She wasn't scared of him. He's not hungry, Sybil taunted, as though this was an old argument between them. Thor bobbed his head. As my wife says. That was weird. But Freyja didn't have time to think about it, because Sybil had started counting down from 3, and she had agreed to do this. 3, 2, 1, go. Freyja popped the piece into her mouth. Tartness hit her tongue, then saltin. Actually, that wasn't bad. It almost reminded her of pineapple pizza, except without the tomato, because you didn't need it with all those berry flavors bursting out everywhere. Freyja swallowed. That's not bad. She reached for a buttered piece. It was good, but a bit bland after the one with jam. Ugh, no thank you. You can keep the jam away from my muffins, Sybil said, reaching for another one. You can have as many as you like, though. The recipe's for the cafe, so I may have made a bigger batch than we need for 3 of us. Thor just shook his head. You, Dr. Freyja, are an honorary Viking, with taste to rival that of the greatest warriors in Valhalla. Where's you, my wife? I'm just married to one. Yeah, I know. Remind me to introduce you to Vegemite sometime. I think Hemsworth did an instructional video too. You'll like that. Sybil flicked her tea towel at him, before hanging it over the rail and turning her attention to the coffee maker. You must be Freyja. Arms came out of nowhere, wrapping Freyja in a tight hug from behind so she couldn't even see her assailant. Oh my God, Carl said you are the absolute queen of reindeer dissection. I can learn so much from you. When you're done dealing with Odin, I want to be right there in the lab with you, until you've taught me everything. Tall, thin and blonde, Freyja's assailant might have been a Viking shield maiden if she'd lived in those times. Her eyes shone with a frightening intensity that made Freyja think about berserkers. She couldn't suppress a slight shudder. And you are? The blonde's jaw dropped. Shit. Sorry. I'm Jarun. I'm the one who found Odin, which means I should probably be more excited about him than all the reindeer corpses, but Vikings are more Carl and Sybil's thing, while I just do reindeer. And wolverines and wolves, don't forget, said a male voice as a new man stepped into the room, seizing Jarun from behind so he could nuzzle her neck. Freyja's head spun. If Thor was Olaf's younger brother, then this man was the baby of the three, who hadn't yet grown massive muscles like the other two, but he still looked strong enough to take them on. Jarun began to laugh. Oh my God, it just hit me. Saint Nick and all his bullshit about us Aussie girls being obsessed with Australian actors, and he totally got owned by a Wolverine. Not quite Hugh Jackman, but oh shit. Karma bit that thieving asshole on the ass, all right. Freyja blinked. Nick was stealing stuff. She'd heard rumors about artifacts going missing, but Carl had just dismissed it as poor attention to detail when they were packing up, as it was mostly small stuff that was easy to misplace. Had Nick somehow masterminded the theft of the ice mummy, too? The helicopter pilot had said he'd had to go to the hospital first with Nick, before he'd brought the ice mummy here. That meant the pilot had to be in on it. Then again, he'd said something about cleaning the helicopter, so maybe if the ice mummy had been taken out and switched while the cleaning was going on, without the pilot noticing, he might be as innocent as she was. Which meant, the body might have been stolen before it even arrived at the lab. Maybe that block of ice she'd taken to the necropsy fridge had been just that, a big block of ice with nothing inside. Well, except maybe that spear. Jarun nodded. Yep, and he tried to pin the whole thing on me. He was smuggling stuff back in the waste containers. Thor and Sybil confirmed it, but Carl didn't believe me until he went through Nick's pockets, in the coat and pants he left behind. Quite the haul of Viking valuables. I heard when he arrived in hospital, the police handcuffed him to the bed. I bet he loved waking up like that. Freyja slumped. If Nick had been unconscious all the way from the dig site, he couldn't possibly have been involved in the body theft. Wouldn't have even known the body existed. And yet, if someone had switched one ice block for another, it was still possible that she'd never received Carl's ice mummy, and being snowed in here actually proved her innocence, because there was no way she could have gotten out, let alone taken a non-existent body with her. But the police would never believe it. Not unless the body turned up somewhere else. And she had no idea where it might be, except that it definitely wasn't here. She reached for her muffin, only to find her plate was empty. Would Sybil mind if she had another one? If she was going to prison on Monday anyway. Hey, it's nice thinking about Saint Nick getting a bit of justice and all, but remember the real reason we're here, said the youngest man, whose name Freyja still didn't know, though he was looking pointedly at her now. We're here to talk to Odin. The big daddy of the Norse pantheon. Freyja couldn't have heard right. Who? Odin. Carl's ice mummy. That's what we've been calling him, Jarun said. Fuck. Freyja had thought the police were what she'd have to worry about, but the way these four crowded around her, radiating expectation. They were going to kill her when they found out. She swallowed. And told them. The man whose name she didn't know spread his hands wide, as if asking the universe for patience. Or maybe even Odin himself. What do you mean, Odin's missing? 35. Freyja had no words left. She told them everything, even if she hadn't mentioned her suspicions about Olaf or the helicopter pilot. Well, and the bit about her own personal history. Nick had probably already told them, like he'd told everyone else at the university, and if they didn't know, they soon would. So she said the only thing she could think of, "I'll show you." She marched to the necropsy lab, where she had to swipe her pass card twice, her hands were shaking so badly. She wouldn't have minded keeping it a secret for another few days, before her life as she knew it ended, but when had she ever gotten to choose what happened in her life? People just barged in and fucked things up whenever they pleased, and she had no control over anything. She was supposed to have pancakes for breakfast this morning, and instead she'd had a couple of muffins. Good muffins, sure, with weird jam that worked in a way she didn't quite understand, but definitely not pancakes. She shoved the door open so hard it bounced off the wall, but one of the men caught it in time before it could hit anyone. She'd be grateful for that later, but right now, she just didn't care anymore. How could she, when everything was so fucked up? Freyja wrenched the fridge door open, and flung that against the wall too, where it caught on the hook that was supposed to hold it open. So everyone could see how fucking empty the fridge was. Much like her future. She couldn't even bring herself to look at the empty mortuary trolley, where a solitary spear swam in a pool of melted ice. What happened to his clothes? One of the men asked. Sybil coughed. Well, that's the thing about ice archaeology. The ice melts and refreezes depending on the weather each year, so while some things stay frozen pretty much from the moment they hit the ground, other things melt out, or get moved, depending on what the ice does. So if something falls into a glacier, it's likely to get crushed by all the ice moving over the years. Sure, it's slow, but that's a lot of pressure. Even modern bodies don't last long, or so I've heard. Whereas if a shirt falls off a sled into the snow, like the tunic Nick found, and almost instantly freezes, and it stays there like that for a couple thousand years, the first time it defrosts, well, it's like when you freeze food. It stays fresh. So you're saying the ice in his clothes melted and they wore out, but then the ice froze around him again? One of the men asked. Yes, but that's not possible, Freyja interrupted. Human flesh is every bit as fragile as clothing. Sometimes even more so, depending on what bacteria is present. If we had bones encased in fragments of clothing, that would make sense. Or leather clothing, protecting the body maybe. But for the clothes to completely disintegrate and leave the body intact, that's just not possible. Now, if the body was buried naked. She took a step closer, so she could see the body that she couldn't quite believe lay on the trolley, like it had never gone missing at all. Which made no sense. She'd seen the empty trolley. Olaf had seen the empty trolley. He'd even picked up the spear, which this body was holding across his torso, like some medieval knight with a sword. Not that it hid much, him being naked and all. The weapon between his legs looked more impressive, especially given how cold it was in here. When he was alive, women must have absolutely flocked to his bed with a cock that big. One of Olaf's ancestors, for sure. She knew she should grab a pair of gloves, so she didn't risk contaminating the body. But she had to touch it with her bare hands, to know it was real and not a hallucination. Freyja reached out, her fingers hovering over the spear, then moving down past his private parts, to wow, he still had hair on his legs. Sling a towel around his waist, and he might have been Thor, just stepped out of the shower. Finally, she lowered her hand, resting her fingers on his calf, which seemed safe enough. She was surprised at how cold he felt, then mentally shook herself. This was an ice mummy that had lain in the ice for hundreds of years before arriving here in the lab fridge. Well, she wasn't exactly sure when he'd arrived here, seeing as this was the first time she'd actually seen him in the flesh, so to speak, instead of encased in ice, but in order to stay so well preserved, he'd have to have been somewhere cold in the interim. She wanted to ask him where he'd been, what sort of life he'd lived before he ended up in the ice, but mostly, where he'd disappeared to over the last week. She wanted to look him in the eye and tell him he was as fucking selfish as a mal. So without really thinking about it, she moved along the trolley so she was level with his head. Automatically, she reached for his throat to check for a pulse. She wasn't surprised she didn't feel one. It was silly she'd even bothered to check. Someone this cold was definitely dead. She took a deep breath, fixed her gaze on his face and said, "Oh fuck. Olaf." 36. Who's Olaf? Oh, he was the maintenance man here. He didn't even last a day. Is working here that bad? No, he arrived at work, only to get a message that his wife had been in an accident, so he had to go to hospital. A rock climbing accident, where she'd fallen and broken her arm, and she needed surgery. So he went to hospital to hold her hand and take care of her and stuff, except one of the nurses caught this virus. You know, the one everyone's going crazy about right now, but she didn't know she had it, so she gave it to, well, pretty much everyone. Olaf's wife, plus a whole lot of other staff and patients. So they quarantined the whole hospital. And just when you think they're finally going to be allowed to go home, Olaf gets sick. Really sick. Like, complications with the virus, and gets sent to intensive care sick. So his wife's the one holding the phone, sending messages to the lab group chat. I checked this morning, and it looks like he's finally been allowed to go home, but no way has he been cleared as fit for work. Especially a physical job like maintenance. But the thing is, you can't fire someone for getting infected, and the university can't hire someone new to replace him, even if Carl weren't up in the mountains. So Olaf is the maintenance man we don't have. We have his uniforms, his security pass, pretty much everything except the man they're meant for. Does he look like Olaf? How should I know? I never met him. But he's wearing Olaf's uniform with his name on it, so it's safe to say they're the same size. So why didn't you tell her? Because there never seemed to be a good time to tell her. My last memory from more than 1,000 years ago was having my heart cut out by a witch who put a spell on me before burying me alive. That's your last memory? Not the things Eric said about me. Eric was a bag of wind who loved to talk, even when any sane man had stopped listening. I refused to break bread with him, for I knew I would never keep the food down. A cup of spiced wine from his healer was all the hospitality I could stomach in Eric's hall. Unlike some. There was a reason for it, I promise you. Of that I am certain. I was trying to poison Eric's sons. Like he'd killed my family, I wanted him to suffer too. Before I killed him. A pity you did not succeed. I do not know whether I did or not. The poisons were ones that act slowly, over several days. By the time the sons died, we were already cursed. Have you heard anything of Eric since you have awoken? Only his witch, and the abomination. Her wolfman. I have heard her voice in my dreams. She calls us, tries to awaken us. Does she not know we are already awake and bound to protect already? She seeks us still, so perhaps she does not. That is why we are here. Together, we may defeat her and the abomination, and remove this curse upon us. I cannot help you. I am bound to protect her, and in order to do so, I must return to my slumber. If she does not have a body of a man from our time, she will face a trial for theft. That won't work, you know. Awake or asleep, you're not human anymore, and we have technology now that will show that. But no one believes in curses or magic, or any of this stuff anymore, so no one will believe the findings. She'll look like a fool. All of us will. So, we need another body. One that isn't mine or yours or Thor's. Do you know where the rest of our men were buried? No. The witch took them away. She said I would see them again when it was time to lead them to victory in Eric's name, and not before then. Someone exploded into laughter. As though you would ever serve Eric. There are many things I would do to preserve the lives of my men, though I feared he would not honor the bargain. To see you here, to hear your voices again, brings joy to my heart I never thought to feel again. Look, the blossoming bromance here is really lovely, and I think we should absolutely come back to it later, probably with popcorn and drinks, but didn't you just say that you're all going to stay cursed unless you can defeat this witch, and to do that requires all three of you, and you boys need the three of us, because you'll never survive in this time on your own. Yes. But in order to make sure you have three of us, and poor Freyja doesn't get arrested, we need to find a body in the ice. The sort of body Carl has only found once in a decade of searching, and then it was just you. I will find one. We don't have a decade. We only have 2 days, and with the sunlight thing, it's only really 2 nights. 1 day and a night is all I need. A day of searching the ice, and a night to fly the body back here. You have to make sure the body is old enough. At least 1,000 years, maybe more. Perfectly preserved, so it looks like it's just sleeping. And no Nazis. What in the God's name is a Nazi? Well, he likely would have been wearing a symbol like this on his clothing somewhere. Several of them burst out laughing. That is Odin's family crest. If he'd been wearing clothes, you would have seen that symbol on him. So what are the chances of finding the dead body of one of Odin's relatives in the ice? Very low. We burned the bodies of our dead in my family, and I was the last one left when we fought against Eric. So, leave anyone wearing this symbol, or in modern clothes you don't recognize. And steer clear of the witch. If you fly back tonight, you'll have all of tomorrow to search, and return the following night, before the police arrive. Do you think you can do it? For Odin and his beloved, I will. But first I must return your wife's brooch. Thor, do you have it? Sybil said she had to put it somewhere safe. Can you get it, Sybil? Hush. She stirs. Freyja wanted to believe she was dreaming, but she knew those voices too well. Most of them, anyway. Even if nothing they said made any sense. Maybe she had suffered a bad head injury when she'd lost control of the scooter, and none of this was real. The whole week with Olaf and the ice mummy going missing. She'd open her eyes and... Olaf beamed at her. How are you feeling? She squinted at him. How are you not dead? You were cold, just like a cadaver, and naked. Now he was wearing his overalls again, with his name on the breast pocket and everything. Like she'd imagined everything. Can you look in the fridge and tell me if the ice mummy is where it's supposed to be? Because that would solve all her problems. Well, most of them. She'd still have a head injury, but the healthcare system here in Norway was every bit as good as the one at home. She wouldn't have to go to prison, and she'd never eat another pineapple pizza again. But maybe that stuff with the jam. He frowned. Loki will see to it that you have your body before the police arrive. Loki? The man who was going body hunting was called Loki? No. This was a bad idea. Freyja heaved herself up, off the table and onto shaky legs. She had to get to the fridge, to see for herself. She made it to the fridge, and even managed to open the door, but she had to hang on to it, because her legs threatened to give out underneath her. The empty mortuary trolley stood there, just as it had all week. No water now, but that spear was there, like the corpse had forgotten it when it had gotten up and walked out. Olaf. His hands rested firmly on her hips, supporting her. My name is Odin. I probably should have told you sooner, but it seemed such a small thing, when it was more important to ensure your survival. She smacked his hands away. Oh, and while we're talking about small things you should have told me, what about your wife? Didn't you think it was important to mention you had one of those? He sighed. I did have a wife. She died a long time ago. Before or after your son died? Or did you lie about that too? Actually, I do not know. I had a wife and 2 sons, and she died defending them when our home was attacked, and I was away. When I returned, they were all dead. My whole family. And just like that, her anger dissolved. Poor Olaf, Odin, or whoever he was. To lose his whole family in one night. I'm sorry for your loss, she whispered. It was a long time ago. More than 1,000 years, if I read your history books right. I mourned them as was proper, as we all did. Then I set out to seek vengeance, which somehow led to me arriving here and meeting you. It is fate, Odin said, holding his hands out to her. Freyja didn't take them. You expect me to believe the body in the ice was you? People don't sleep for 1,000 years and just wake up, ready to rescue people and have sex all night. That's not medically possible. You'd need plenty of live, oxygenated blood cells to get an erection, for a start. And English didn't even exist 1,000 years ago. I barely understand Shakespeare, and that was only 400 years ago. This is insane. You are insane. I must have hit my head because none of this makes sense. I must have imagined you and the others. Sybil and Joran are from your time, while Thor and Loki are from mine. You can speak to them all. They will confirm that all I have told you is true. They came here to stop you from using science to find out what we are. Not human. That's what Joran had said, hadn't she? He wasn't human. None of the men were. She was almost afraid to ask, but she was also more afraid of what might happen if she didn't know what kind of creature she'd slept with, believing he was a man, when he was something else entirely. What are you? We called them Dra in our language. I think in yours the word is gargoyle. The dead who are not dead, protectors bound by magic to answer the call to defend the land on which they are buried, and those who dwell there. You summoned me to save you that night in the snow, and again tonight. You also have the power to send me back to sleep, when I have served my purpose, as I was when you saw me there. Odin pointed at the trolley. Her hand shot out, before she could really think about what she was doing, and grasped his outstretched arm. His flesh was as warm as hers, maybe even warmer, like he was alive, not dead. It felt as yielding as hard muscle, not. This makes no sense. How can you be dead, but not dead? Odin shrugged. A witch laid a curse upon me. I know many things, but the ways of witches are beyond all I have learned. Much like your electricity, I fear. My body is living stone. My heart no longer beats and I no longer need food or drink or air to breathe. But the spell gives me the strength I need to defend you, and the knowledge to understand your words, though they were unfamiliar to me. Even my manhood is made for your pleasure. As a human man, never have I known such stamina, and everything that I have, everything that I am, is all for you. You summoned me from my slumber to serve you, and I delight in doing so. He dropped his voice to a low growl. Especially when you take me into your bed. Freyja felt her face grow hot. She didn't know where to look. She'd slept with a man who was really a monster. I thought gargoyles were big and ugly, with wings and horns and things, she blurted out. Odin bowed his head. Freyja blinked, and the man she'd known was gone. In his place stood a horned, winged demon. A demon with Odin's face and even his eye patch. "Fuck," she breathed, backing up until she hit the wall. She didn't dare take her eyes off the creature. "But you see, I am yours to command. And you fear me in this form, while you wish to fuck my other one." Before her eyes, he transformed back into a man. "So this is how I appear to you, so that I may better serve you. Which one is really you?" Odin gestured at his body. "This is what I looked like as a man in my time. The curse allows me to transform into that creature, so that I may better protect you. Thor tells me our wings are strong enough to carry not just ourselves, but a chosen companion as well. That is how he and Loki brought their wives here, and how Loki will transport the body back when he finds it." Freyja just shook her head. "I'll believe it when I see it. And maybe not even then." 37. While Odin had slept, power had returned to the chamber where he and Freyja had first made love, so she insisted on moving her mattress back there from its present place in the scriptorium. She also insisted she did not need any assistance from him, but this part he intended to ignore. Now he had nothing to hide from her. He seized the mattress and transported it directly to her room, through the walls, without having to maneuver it around corners and through narrow passageways, as they had before. It took several minutes before she joined him in her chamber, during which time he'd already set the mattress back on the bed frame. What he'd give to lie her down and make love to her on this bed again, but he feared that would not happen now, for he'd seen the revulsion in her eyes when he'd appeared to her in his accursed form. He'd not been able to suppress a shudder himself when he'd seen his own monstrous reflection, so he could hardly blame her. So he forced himself to bow and say, "Let me know if you wish for my assistance with anything else," before he departed. He found the others in the feasting hall, clustered around a table. When he sat down, Loki pushed a small box toward him. "Frigg's brooch," he said. "The girls say that you must return it, as it is a priceless artifact, which they promise to keep safe for you. I maintain that it is your property, therefore it is your choice what you do with it, just as Thor's hammer belongs to him. Sybil may study my hammer for as long as she wishes, as long as it is within arm's reach for me to use it to defend her as necessary," Thor said. Thor would never have been parted from his weapon in the past. He must truly love this woman to surrender it to her, something Odin would never have believed possible in a man who loved battle more than anything. Odin had always envied Thor for his clear, uncomplicated views on life. Thor went for what he wanted, without worrying about consequences, or whether he might not achieve his heart's desire. He kept no secrets, and Odin was fairly certain the man was incapable of lying. Even now, in a world so alien to their own, Thor had met a woman, fallen in love with her, and persuaded her to marry him. No wonder Odin envied him even more now. Thor would never understand his relationship with Frigg, or why Odin had withheld the truth from Freyja. But it was time to come clean. She deserved to know everything. Not just about the curse, but about Frigg, and all the things that had led up to this moment. Odin scooped up the box. "If you have need of me, you will find me in Freyja's chamber," he said. The door was locked, so he stepped through the wall. She was sitting on her bed, staring sightlessly at the wall, too deep in thought to notice him at first. Then she blinked, frowned, and said, "Didn't Vikings do privacy in your time? You could have at least knocked." Odin perched on the corner of her bed. "I feared you would not have allowed me to enter." "Well, yeah. Privacy. I'm still trying to get my head straight with all this. You. Them. Learning I had sex with a 1,000-year-old man. That's a hell of an age gap, and while I was falsely accused of necrophilia in the past, now I might have actually done it, and I'm not sure I know how to feel about that." Worse, I liked it, so what does that say about me? There was an edge of hysteria in her tone, and Odin knew that was his fault. He had driven her to this, and he owed it to her to help her make sense of it all. You told me about the shameful things in your past. About the man whose selfish actions drove you to flee your home. I told you a little about losing my son, and you were kind. Sympathetic. Things I did not deserve, for I did not tell you everything. For a start, I did not tell you about my wife. Yeah, you really should have. I mean, if the wound's still too fresh, I get why you might not want to talk about her, but I deserve to know. Odin nodded. He opened the box and laid it on the bed. This brooch belonged to my wife Frigg. It was her dowry, a gift from her mother. She was wearing it when she died, and I wore it every day until the night I was cursed. Your people found it in the ice, near where I was buried. Freyja picked up the box and peered inside. It's beautiful, she breathed. Is that amber and gold? Yes. Such a jewel would have fed my entire village for a year or more, and there were some long, cold winters that Frigg offered it up in order to do so, but I would never allow it. It was hers, and I intended to lay it on her grave, buried in her ashes, once I had seen justice done for her death. Alas, I failed, and my shame brought me to you. My own men do not know what I am about to tell you, for I fear they would desert me if they did. I have already lost what little regard you might have had for me, but you deserve to know the whole tale. You only saw the monster when I showed you my cursed form, but I fear the monster that lies inside has hidden within me for much longer than that. Will you do me the honor of listening to my tale, though I know I do not deserve it? Freyja folded her arms across her chest. If it explains how a man can sleep for 1,000 years and wake up in my lab. Not because you deserve it, but because if I end up going to prison because of you, then I deserve to hear this. Odin took a deep breath, and began. 38. My father was the chief of our village. We lived on a narrow strip of land between the mountains and the sea, which gave our people access to unique trade goods, as well as making it difficult for raiders to reach us. This did not stop us from sending raiding parties up into the mountains, to raid hunting camps or herds sent up for summer pasture, but most of the time we spent our time fishing and farming, and we sent out trading caravans to other villages. We were known to have superior warriors, and my father insisted that if I wished to be the chieftain after his passing, then I would need to learn to be the best warrior, as well as the best trademaster, so I was sent out often. One particular mission, my father had made it known that he wanted me to find a bride, a girl who would bring wealth and connections to our village, so everywhere I went, the other chieftains threw their daughters and unmarried sisters in my path. Most of them were comely and welcoming enough, but none of them distracted me from what I felt was my true quest, a successful and profitable trading mission. Until I met Frigg. She was slightly older than me, and unlike the other girls, she slammed my jug of mead down in front of me with a scowl and said she'd rather marry my horse than any man, and she'd thank me if I told her father so, for he would not listen to her. I laughed, and offered to share the jug with her if she would tell me why she was so fond of horses. It turned out that she had met one of the southern missionaries, the men who claimed there were not many gods, but only one, and that under his worship, women had formed into communities of learning where they did not marry, and could live their lives as they pleased, for the good of the community. I was fascinated by her story, particularly as my father had insisted I learn to speak and write Latin as well as Norse, and I had never met a woman who shared my love of learning. Freyja blew out a frustrated breath. So you fell in love with her on the spot and got married? Odin laughed. Wherever did you get that idea? No, of course not. We drank mead for most of the night, until we were quite drunk, and I woke up in the back of the cart, with the sun high in the sky, swearing I would never drink again. Some months later, after arriving home at the end of a successful trading expedition, my father fell ill and died, and my people voted me into his place. The first snows had fallen and we were busy preparing stores for winter, when a girl in rags entered the village. She had been badly beaten, and she refused to see a healer until she had spoken to me. Of course I agreed. I offered her hospitality as was proper, and asked her who had done this to her. She looked me squarely in the eye and said, "You did." I had never beaten a woman in my life, not even a shield maiden when we were out raiding, so I was about to send her away, when she told her tale. You see, this was Frigg, and sometime that night, drunk on mead, we had shared a bed, and she had fallen pregnant. She had never been with a man before or since, so she knew the babe was mine, and she'd told her father so, but he called her a whore, beat her, and cast her out. Her mother had given her a small bundle of clothes, some coins and this brooch, but with winter coming and no idea where to go, this had not lasted long. In desperation she had come to me, a woman who would rather marry my horse than me. She had tried to go to the Christian community, but they had turned her away, for they only accepted scholars with a large donation of wealth, and they preferred virgins, not fallen women with children underfoot. So one night with me that I did not even remember had cost her the dream she cherished, and I owed it to her to make reparations. I offered to let her stay here the winter, until she gave birth to our child, and then on our next trading mission, I would take her to the convent myself, with a large enough donation to see her working in their scriptorium for the rest of her life as she wished. She accepted my bargain, until the day after our babies were born, for she was carrying twin sons. I do not know if it was her love for Vali and Vidar that made her stay, or her belief that I had no idea what to do with two newborns, but we struck a new deal. She would marry me and remain my wife until our sons were grown, and then retire to the convent. I in turn would teach her what I knew of Latin and runes, so that she could teach them to our sons. So Frigg became my wife, and to everyone in the village, we were a couple in love. We never fought, and when I was away from home, she took charge of the village, and no one, not even me, disputed her right to do so. She was the best chatelaine I have ever known, and even in the longest, coldest winters, we never went short. But she was never truly my wife. She never shared her body with me again after that one night, and she made no secret of the fact that she preferred it was I was away from home, whether raiding or trading, as long as I was bringing things home to make our village more prosperous. She was our chieftain more than I was, but because she was my wife and she was good at it, no one ever stopped to question it, least of all me. I was grateful for the good care she took of our sons, and our village. So when the attack came, none of us expected it. Most of our best warriors, myself included, were away, and Frigg was left to fight Eric's men off alone. Or Eric's Dra, as I learned later. Too late as fate would have it, but that part of my tale comes later. Eric's army slaughtered everyone. My family. Thor's family. Everyone who was left behind. Yet they did not behave like normal raiders, taking our stores and valuables, for even Frigg's body still bore her brooch, stained with her lifeblood. Some years before, the same had happened to Loki's village, and he'd come to us for help, making him the sole survivor of the attack. It had made no sense to me at the time, but now I know it was Dra, commanded to kill so that Eric could take our lands for his own. I begin to understand. Too late. Our remaining men vowed revenge, and I could not deny them. Frigg and my sons deserved vengeance as much as anyone. So we repaired the village as best we could, and mourned our dead, all the while planning how we might attack Eric, and see that he paid for his crimes against us. With Loki's help, for he is an expert scout without peer, I began to build a picture of Eric's tactics. His Dra attacked from the sea, walking out of the water with little warning, so if we had any change of defeating him, we needed to do so in a place where he did not have Dra nearby. The only place where this was possible was a summer pasture camp in the Jotunheimen Mountains, where Erik had been born and raised. This village was called Utgard, and while he did not return there every year, a raid there would be a strike to his heart, so we waited until we knew he would be there, and we sneaked in through the mountain pass. When we came close, I sent Loki out scouting. He went, but he did not return. I knew this could mean one of two things. Either Erik's men had captured him, or they had not, but they were too close to our encampment for him to return without giving away our position. Either way, we had lost the element of surprise. Erik knew we were coming, and our only hope was to kill him and as many of his men as we could, before we joined our families in Valhalla. I knew when we left the pass that I was leading my men to their death, but I also knew that if I gave them the choice, they would decide to die gloriously in battle, as they would have died defending their families. Thor, warrior at heart though he was, offered to lead the charge in honor of his sister. How could I refuse? I saw my men cut down. Even Thor, who battled like a berserker, was overwhelmed. When there was nothing left but dead and dying men on the field, Erik had his men haul me to his village, where he put his torturer to work on me. But what is pain when you have lost everything, and all you want to do is die? When the man plucked out my eye, I begged him to take the other too, so that I would no longer have to look upon my failure. It was Erik who stopped him. Erik who showed mercy. He said not all of my men were dead, and if I was the leader he'd heard I was, he needed me to command his army, and if I agreed to serve him, he would allow my remaining men to live. Odin let out a bitter laugh. A braver man would have spat in Erik's face, and demanded death. But I had lived with Frigg, who spoke of self-sacrifice as she had done for our sons. For my men who remained, I chose slavery so that they might live. I did not believe Erik would hold to our bargain, for I knew the man who had murdered my children could have no honor to speak of, but if he broke his word, then I would not need to hold to mine. And if but one of my men lived, stubborn Thor or wily Loki, then perhaps vengeance would still be served. Not at my hand, but no less deserved. And so I allowed his healer to dress my wounds, and as she was also his witch, I allowed her to cast her spell over me. Only when it was done did I discover that she intended to curse Thor and Loki too, and Erik would force me to watch, taunting me that he would kill them anyway, and that there was nothing I could do, for the curse already bound me to him. I dare not tell Loki or Thor about the bargain I made, or ask for their forgiveness. We all deserved to die that day, and it was my cowardice that cursed us all. Worse is that I do not regret it, for when I awoke, instead of commanding armies in Erik's name, my first task was to save you, before taking you to bed. The moment I saw your face, I knew I was in love, and when your body joined with mine, neither Valhalla nor Frigg's heaven could compare to the joy I felt. It was the best night of my life, only surpassed by the other nights I have spent in your embrace since. Odin took a deep breath. I am a fool and a failure, as selfish as the man who drove you away from your home to here. If not for the curse, I would have been nothing more than a corpse in your cold storage chamber, something for your science to find answers from. Now, because of me, you may face justice for a crime you never committed. I cannot even begin to think how to compensate you for what I have done to you, and yet when I think of you, it is not guilt that overwhelms me, but love, and how grateful I am for the days I have spent with you. I am sorry, Freyja, for having wronged you. Without waiting for a response, he rose and turned as if to walk out of her room, as easily as he'd stepped into it. Her mind whirling, Freyja didn't know what to think. Wait, she said. Actually, she didn't want to think at all. So she threw her arms around his neck and kissed him instead. 39. Odin could scarcely believe Freyja had touched him, let alone kissed him, but her lips were still soft against his, as undeniably real as everything else he told her. How could she touch him, knowing the truth about him? I'm a monster, he tried to remind her, summoning the horns and wings so that she would see him again and remember. A selfish monster responsible for getting everyone around him killed. I've ruined your life just by being near you. I will. Shut up and kiss me. Better yet, fuck me. I've spent the last week trying to resist you because you're my employee, and then I thought you were dead, and now you've just told me the most tragic, fucked up story I can barely even imagine, where a hug and a bit of sympathy are just not going to cut it, and then you tell me our first night together was the best night of your life? And the ones after that, too? Because they were mine too, and I've just spent the last hour trying to come to terms with the fact that not only am I in love with an undead monster, but every time I see you, I want to rip your clothes off and have you. Repeatedly. Even as you're telling me every chapter of your tragic tale, half my mind is fantasizing about how much I want you to fuck me, like your fool of a wife never did. She stripped off her clothes, leaving them in a puddle on the floor, and wrapped her legs around his hips. We're both failures, and everything falls apart around us. But right now it's just the two of us here, and no one else matters. I want to feel your monster cock deep inside me, Odin. What do you want? The desire in her gaze burned him to his very bones. He couldn't refuse her, even if he wanted to. So he slowly peeled off Olaf's clothing, until he stood as naked as his beloved. Beautiful, soft Freyja, the woman he didn't deserve. I want to hear you scream. I want to hear you scream my name as you take my cock. He lifted her up, pinning her to the wall, before he impaled her. Oh, Odin. More please, she begged. Her legs tightened around his hips, urging him deeper. Gods, she felt good. So tight around him, clenching down hard like she never wanted to let go. Then she grabbed his horns in her hands and guided his mouth to her breast. Sweetness and softness and yes, she was screaming his name in absolute ecstasy, but he couldn't stop. 40. By the time they were done, Freyja could barely walk, so Odin carried her to bed and tucked her beneath the blankets. More please, Odin. Make love to me some more, she mumbled, wrapping her hand around his cock. Odin laughed softly and leaned forward to kiss her. Later, beloved. When you have rested. It is late and humans need sleep. When you wake, I will be ready for you. I will always be ready for you. I am your monster. My monster, she murmured as her eyes drifted shut. Perhaps he shouldn't have pounded into her so hard, so that she'd scream louder. Then she might not have tired so quickly, and they might have made love for longer. He swore he'd keep the pace slow and steady next time, so that they'd have all night. Next time, and the one after that. It took all his willpower to leave her chamber, and return to the others in the cafeteria. Except the only person left there was the blonde girl, Jarun. Where is everyone? He asked. I imagine Freyja's asleep, or you'd still be pounding the walls. Sybil and Thor are busy breaking the bed, and Loki and I would be doing the same, except he left as soon as it got dark, so he could steal a body for you. She gestured toward his horns. I take it you told her everything and it went well then? Unless I missed the argument and what I heard was make-up sex. Before, when he was married to Frigg, talk of sex had always made him uncomfortable, because he knew he'd have to lie. Now though, Odin allowed himself a satisfied smile. I believe she is pleased with me, yes. I sure hope so, because that's some seriously fucked up shit you pulled. Faking your own death. If Loki tried that with me, I'd pull all his feathers off. It took Odin a moment to realize what she'd said. He told you his secret? Loki must intend to marry the woman, then, for he'd never told anyone else. Odin only knew because Loki had come to him in animal form when his village was under attack. Which one? The shape-shifting, or the illusions? Or just magic in general? I've got to admit, the night he made himself look like me still makes me shudder. I have nightmares that he'll do it again one night when we're doing it, and put me right off." She shuddered. "He flew back as a falcon. He said it'd be faster. Thor wanted him to take his time choosing a body and to come back tomorrow night, but he promised me he'd be back by dawn. He'll be pissed if Thor and Sybil break the bed before we do." "How long until dawn?" Odin asked. Slumbering in cold storage and all his time inside this building, he didn't know what time it was. Jarun glanced at the thick bracelet encircling her wrist. "A couple of hours at most, I think. Maybe less. The sun rises early this time of year." Odin blinked. "I thought it was winter, with all the snow on the ground." Jarun grinned. "Nope. It's the height of summer, not long past the solstice. Climate change has really messed up the weather. Early ice melt meant we got to go out to the dig site early, only to get buried in a summer blizzard. Can't even blame a volcano for this one. All the solar panels in the world won't save us, though I suppose we can hope." Then she shook her head. "Sorry. A lot of scientific advancements have happened while you were asleep. I should probably see if there's a science history channel on the internet or something that'll help you catch up." Odin wasn't sure what she was talking about. The solar panels on the roof help to regulate the weather? Jarun blinked. "Well, maybe, if you consider reducing fossil fuel emissions to be helping, even if it's only a little. I didn't even know we had solar panels out here. I mean, it seems a bit counterintuitive, what with all the snow and all. Where'd you learn about them?" "I read the maintenance manual for this place, then every book in the library," Odin said. "Is it true that Nazis, the people who wore my family crest, killed 6 million people?" He could barely believe there were that many people alive in the world, let alone dead. "History isn't really my forte. I'm a biologist by trade, so I know more about reindeer and thylacines than concentration camps. But I did hear that the numbers in the official history books are a gross underestimate. I met a Polish girl once who used to be a guide at one of the camps, and she said it was more like 20 million. Odin couldn't imagine those kind of numbers. Loki stumbled into the cafeteria, looking absolutely exhausted. "Wake up the others, so you can tell me where to put the body. I've left it outside in the snow, but I'll need to get it inside by dawn, and that's not far off." Odin held up his hand. "Let them sleep. I shall show you, and if Freyja wants you to move it or do anything else with it, she can tell you in the morning." 41. Freyja woke in a warm, snug bed, with a body pressed up against hers. Odin, just as magnificent as she remembered. No horns this morning though. But his cock was hard and ready, reminding her how much she wanted more of him. Especially if the police would be here to arrest her tomorrow morning. This might be the last chance she had to have morning sex with him ever. "Ah, you are awake. The others will be pleased. They have been waiting to see if you approve of Loki's find." Loki, hadn't they sent him looking for a body? Suddenly she wasn't so interested in sex anymore. Cadavers did do that to a person. "Can't we just stay in bed a little longer? If you approve of what he brought, then I will be able to warm your bed every night, for as long as you wish." Forever. The word was out of her mouth before she'd thought it through, but she knew it was true. "Then let this be the first morning of forever," Odin said, pressing a kiss to her bare shoulder. Freyja swallowed. If by some miracle Loki had found a second ice mummy at the site, old enough to be from Odin's time or earlier, she would be safe. She could stay here with a job, a home, and Odin. It would indeed take a miracle, but for all that, she was willing to hope. So she showered and dressed with her usual morning efficiency, and followed Odin to the lab. Finally, Loki said, throwing his hands in the air. It's too late for me to take it back today if you don't like it, let alone find another one, but you wanted a body that's from our time, who did not serve Odin's family, and is very well preserved. This one is all three. He looked smug. Show her then, Odin said. If you would open the door. Freyja swiped her pass card and let them all into the necropsy lab. She was sick of the sight of this fridge, but she opened the door anyway. The sooner this was over with, the better, because then she could have breakfast. Autopsies before breakfast. Always. Because things could get way too messy if you did them the wrong way around. This time, there was a body bag on the trolley, zipped up all the way. Freyja blew out a breath. Couldn't you have opened it up? Loki shrugged. There was no point, if you wanted me to take him back again. So I left him in the bag. Body shopping. The man had gone body shopping for her. If she thought about it too hard, she'd go mad. So she donned a pair of gloves instead and unzipped the bag. The body was still frozen, with a thin layer of ice crystals frosting his clothing, which she gauged to be made of wool. Not modern at least, and the lack of buttons was promising. He wore no gloves, and his hands were in remarkably good condition. More like a recent cadaver, than one that had been in the ice for a millennium. Her belly began to twist uncomfortably. Maybe this was a murder victim after all. She glanced down the body and her heart sank. The hilt of a knife protruded from the body's belly, in the middle of a dark stain on the man's tunic that might have been blood. She reached for the knife. Walrus ivory. This was the eating knife of a rich man, Loki said. How do you know? Freyja asked, almost afraid of the answer. Loki shrugged. Because I once challenged its owner to an eating contest, and won. Freyja froze. You know this man? I might have spoken to him once. Maybe. But I know his kind. Realization dawned. But you know the man who killed him. Another shrug. I know the man who owned the knife. But I don't think he stabbed him, on account of being already dead. Loki reached into the bag and pulled out a stone tablet, covered with Viking runes. He came with a warning. Odin took the tablet from him. Here lies Orm the traitor, who betrayed his brother and his king. He poisoned the two princes, before he stabbed the king. When he tried to claim the throne, justice was done. He is buried here without honor, for he had none, he read. He touched his eye patch. This is the torturer, who took my eye. And here I thought you were wounded in battle. Well, the joke's on him, because I know for a fact he didn't poison Eric's sons, Loki said. But if he was the one who killed Eric, then perhaps I'll let him go down in history as the man who murdered his sons too. It looks like they buried him alive for it. A fitting end for this bastard. Almost as good as being raped to death by Randy reindeer. Or walruses. Now walruses would make things really messy. Freyja stared at the man. What was wrong with him? Loki, shut your mouth. There is a lady present, Odin said. Yes, Odin. Freyja took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Whoever this man had been, he was from the Viking age. A fitting ice mummy for Carl and his students to study. No matter what crimes he might have committed during his life, his presence here was about to save her from being arrested. We need to get him out of the bag and onto the table, she said. With Odin and Loki's help, they soon had him ready for study, with the runestone carefully placed above his head. It would not have fitted on the table with Odin, but Orm was considerably shorter than even Loki, the smallest of the three men. Finally, Freyja could breathe. She peeled off her gloves, then washed her hands thoroughly before leading the way out of the lab. After the week I've just had, that body in the fridge is enough to make me want to have champagne. But as I drank it all, Perhaps a celebratory breakfast will do. Loki waved his hands. Yes, you go do human things. I promised Jarun we would break the bed before breakfast, so I will go wake her. Freyja looked at Odin. Should we follow him to make sure she's all right? Odin smiled. Just as I am your protector, he is hers. As long as he is cursed, he cannot hurt her. Besides, Jarun is made of the same stuff as the shield maidens of my time. It is Loki who must watch himself with a woman like that. 42. If they are on foot, then they will arrive here tonight, Thor said. We must have a plan. How could they possibly know where we are? No one knows we're here except us. They couldn't possibly have followed us here unless they could fly, in which case, they'd already be here. So what makes you think they'll come here? Sybil asked. Because even the dullest witch can do a scrying spell to find what they are looking for, Loki said. Jarun brightened. So you can tell us where they are? Loki winced. I can try, but unless I recognize the place, it still won't help. But we still must have a plan, Thor insisted. He turned to Odin. What shall we do? Odin sighed. That was the problem, wasn't it? Thor and Loki, like the rest of his men, would follow him anywhere. They'd even followed him here. But then, just like now, he still hadn't truly known a way they could win. What do we know? The witch is coming, with the Wolfman. He is her protector, so any threat to the witch will be met with force from him, Odin began. I will fight Fenrir. I have my hammer, and I am stronger now. There are no other warriors here to distract me. This time I will be victorious, leaving the rest of you to deal with the witch, Thor said eagerly. Do we know what powers the witch has? She's a healer, and she cast the curse on us. What else could she do? Odin asked. Loki spread his hands wide. Her mother was a powerful enchantress, whose spells kept me captive in Eric's longhouse while the battle raged outside. If she learned magic from her mother, and inherited even part of her power, there is no telling what spells she might cast. So we make sure we meet them outside. I don't want any of you destroying my lab, Freyja said. Odin nodded. Yes. If there is a battle, it must be outside in the courtyard. We three warriors will meet them, while you women. Here it comes. Scratch a man and you'll find the misogyny, Jarun said, setting her hands on her hips. I've got news for you, big Viking warrior. Us girls aren't hiding anywhere. You three might be good at whacking things with swords and hammers and axes, but you know bugger all about this time or the world as it is now. If they know even the slightest bit more than you do, you're fucked. You need us. Loki, Odin began, appealing to the man for help. Jarun just shook her head. If you're about to tell him to control his woman, I'm about to dump this can of Coke in your lap. You might be made of living stone, mate, but this is acid, strong enough to clean coins. How long do you think Freyja will stay with you if I melt your cock off? You would use sorcery on me? Odin asked. Jarun shrugged. Actually, it's just basic chemistry. Or alchemy, for the medieval misogynists in the room. Loki just stared at her like a lovesick fool. Marry me, he said. Jarun considered for a moment. If we survive this encounter with a 1,000-year-old witch and her immortal werewolf, I will. Loki's grin widened. So while Thor's playing with the Wolfman, we distract the witch. If she bites her lip, distract her before she can cast a spell. Blood fuels her magic, so whatever you do, don't make her bleed. When the wolf is down, we fan out and surround her. She can't take all of us at once, and we convince her to tell us where Eric is, if he's still alive, and maybe even break the curse. Freyja, is there a particular place outside we should choose for our battlefield? Freyja nodded. The courtyard between the loading dock and the outbuildings, next to the helipad. It's still covered in snow, so maybe we could distract the witch by throwing snowballs at her? Odin. Loki burst out laughing. Did he tell you about the time he knocked out a reindeer with a snowball? He stole it from me and everything. I already had it half tamed and he just came in and wham! It woke up harnessed to his sled, and that was it. It was Odin's pet reindeer after that. He shook his head. Maybe that'll work on the witch. If all else fails, knock her out with a snowball, Odin. Odin buried his head in his hands. This is a terrible plan. Thor clapped him on the back. Then let's go outside to the courtyard and think of a better one. They all trooped down to the loading dock, where the girls donned their snow gear and the guys stood around waiting, not sure what to say. As if their easy camaraderie as brothers in arms had been left frozen in the ice while the centuries passed. Yet they were the same people. Thor tossed his hammer from one hand to the other, with a vague smile on his face. Loki licked his lips, intent on some idea that he would surely tell them when he was ready. And Odin. His eyes darted from his men to the women. Sybil looked like a girl in her padded jacket, with little more than her eyes showing. Jurun flicked switches on the wall, while Freyja was still reluctantly tugging on her jacket, after taking forever to pull on her boots. While the others looked like they wanted to be here, she was putting on a brave face, her eyes darting back down the corridor, deeper inside the building. Odin moved to her side. You don't need to do this, you know. You can stay inside, where you'll be safe. Freyja just gave him a funny look. I'm not going to run and hide. I was thinking of going back for the first aid kit. In case someone hurts themselves, it'll save time if we already have it here. You're not afraid? I'm afraid someone will get hurt. Magic and monsters might be more than I can understand, but I'm still a doctor, and I know that if someone can get injured, they will, and that I should be prepared. She wet her lips. I'm going to get the first aid kit. I'll be right back, okay? She hurried off. Jurun pressed the button to open the roller door, then looked around. Where'd Freyja go? She went to get something. She said she'd be right back. Well, I hope so, because it looks like we have visitors, Sybil said grimly. 43. Odin might have mistaken the pair for people of this time, for they wore modern garments, though styled more like those of his time. Her tunic glowed a dark blood red in the bright lights beaming across the courtyard, above polished leather boots. Over it all, she wore a dark woolen cloak that seemed to glitter like the night sky above. She looked like just a girl, younger than Freyja and her friends, until her gaze met his and recognition sparked. She inclined her head. Well met, Jarl Odin. Odin was at a loss, he did not remember the witch's name. Thor, like a good brother in arms, came to his rescue. You are an abomination, and you do not deserve to live. I, Thor, Hymir's son, so vow, and I will not rest until you are dead. He flew across the courtyard and slammed into the witch's companion, knocking him into the snow. The fight was fast and furious, for though Thor wielded his hammer, and more than once Odin heard the sound of the hammerhead cracking what could only be bone, the wolfman sprouted fur, fangs and claws, all of which he used liberally on Thor. Snow flew up in clouds, obscuring the fight for minutes at a time, until the combatants appeared, roaring and snarling at one another, before tumbling to the ground out of sight once more. You have to stop this, Sybil insisted, grabbing the witch's shoulders, for the girl had come to stand beside the lab door like the rest of them, to get out of the way of the fight. The witch shrugged. They are men, and men will always fight. Especially when there is honor at stake. There is no sense in trying to stop them, until they are finished with this foolishness, or one of them has won. I can do this all day, the wolfman snarled. And I can do this all night, Thor growled back. An almighty crack sounded somewhere in the snow, and both men roared in response. Sybil sniffed. So much for being a powerful witch. If you won't stop this, I will." She charged into the snow before anyone could stop her. Another deafening crack, a ringing clang, and then a man's scream, "Sybil!" 44. When Freyja reached the loading dock, the door was wide open and everyone was gone. "I said I'd only be a second," she grumbled as she left the gurney on the dock, with the first aid boxes stacked on top of it. Why had no one thought to put a trolley in the first aid room? The moment she got back to her laptop, she was going to order one. She trudged down the steps to the snow-dusted veranda. "What have I?" A loud gonging drowned out her words. A sound that could only have come from something hitting that fucking sundial. Hard. Then a man's scream, "Sybil!" Freyja didn't think. She broke into a run. The first thing that came into view was the plinth that had once held the sundial. One piece was still stuck to it, but the rest of it had broken into smaller pieces, the largest of which was sitting on Sybil's chest, where she lay on the snow. She gasped for breath, her lips beginning to turn blue, while two men stood over her. "You did this!" Thor howled. "You broke that thing, not me," the stranger shot back. "Fucking idiots. Move," she ordered, shoving them out of the way so she could kneel beside Sybil. It was as bad as she'd suspected. One of the jagged metal pieces of the sculpture had pierced Sybil's jacket, and likely her flesh beneath, too. Sybil stretched out bloodied fingers toward Freyja. "Help," she mouthed, but no sound came out. "Someone get me the first aid kit. Bring it right here, now," Freyja shouted. She had to get the sundial off Sybil, but right now, that was what was sealing her wound. If Freyja judged wrong, and it had pierced the girl's heart or an artery, she might bleed out. But if she didn't, she was going to suffocate. Fuck. If only she could call an ambulance, and get the girl to hospital. But they were still snowed in. Not even a helicopter could land. This was all up to her. The first aid kit arrived and Freyja ripped it open, laying it out on the snow. She grabbed a handful of gauze packages, ready to rip them open, so she could apply pressure on the wound the moment they removed the sundial. Unless, if she had an open pneumothorax, she'd need to dress the wound immediately and get an air tube in there. She'd need a sterile environment for that. It wasn't something she wanted to do out here in the snow. "Get me the gurney. Bring it right here, lay it down beside her," Freyja said, pulling on gloves. She prepped 2 sets of dressings, a pile of gauze she could apply pressure to, in order to staunch the bleeding, or an airtight one to stop air getting in. The stretcher landed in the snow. "Right, you two, grab that metal thing, and I'm going to count to 3. On 3, you're going to lift it off her. 1, 2, 3. Sybil groaned in agony as the sundial came free, but Freyja already had her scissors out, slicing away Sybil's jacket so she could see the wound. "Oh, thank fuck, open pneumothorax." Freyja grabbed the correct dressing, taping it on 3 sides, just like she'd practiced. Only Sybil still couldn't breathe. Her lips were definitely blue now. They had to get her inside. "Right, you and you, muscles. On 3, we're all going to slide her onto the stretcher, and then you're going to carry her inside. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Thor and the other man obeyed, and the snow seemed to part like the Red Sea for them as they glided through it to the loading dock, where they stuck the stretcher back on the gurney. Thor helped her push Sybil into the first aid room, where Freyja grabbed an oxygen bottle, the one thing she hadn't bothered to bring with her earlier, and fitted the mask to Sybil's face. "What are you doing? What is that?" Thor yelped. The last thing Freyja needed were hysterical family members getting in her face. "Someone get him the fuck out of here so I can focus on my patient." "Sybil! Sybil!" Thor roared as the other men dragged him out. Freyja glanced down at Sybil again, only to find another woman's hands on the wound. Bare hands, no gloves, not even a squirt of sanitizer. Get your hands off my patient, Freyja growled. The girl just smiled at her. She said something Freyja didn't understand, then closed her eyes, her hand still on Sybil's chest. Freyja reached out to grab the girl's arm, only to have her own arm grabbed by a hand with fur and claws. Freyja blinked. The strange man stood beside her, radiating menace. Freyja didn't care. Look, I need to take care of my patient. If you want to help, scrub up and sanitize, and then maybe I'll let you pass me stuff. Not bloody likely, but it would keep them out of her way for a moment. The girl said something else, then bit her lip and touched Freyja's forehead. Share your knowledge with me, she seemed to say, though Freyja was sure she hadn't heard the words at all, before her mind went mad, flipping through memories like some sort of movie montage. Her pracs in the respiratory ward. Page after page from her textbooks. Dissecting endless cadavers. Rotations in the emergency department. More textbooks. And then, the image of what was inside Sybil's chest, beneath the dressing. The jagged wound, her lung collapsing in on itself. Like someone had stuck an endoscope in there, but they didn't have that sort of stuff here. Yet as Freyja watched, the wound began to heal. In the darkness beneath Sybil's ribs, her lung swelled as she inhaled. Fuck, Freyja breathed. The strange man was shouting something, but Freyja ignored him. She had to save Sybil. She had to. It's all right. She's a healer. That was Odin, standing in the doorway. Yeah, I know all about medieval medicine. Butchers full of bullshit, the lot of them. Can you get someone to call an ambulance? If I'm lucky, I might be able to stabilize her, but I need to get these two out of here first. I told them, but either they don't understand or they don't care that a girl could die if they don't. Odin spoke, and the girl replied. Odin sighed. She says she is healing your friend, using your knowledge. You must be patient and quiet, because this requires focus and a delicate touch, with just the right amount of power. When she is finished healing her, she would like to borrow your books. Freyja just shook her head. If this girl can save Sybil's life, she can have all of my textbooks to keep. Or better yet, I'll buy her a set, brand new, in whatever language she does speak, seeing as English evidently isn't one of them. Latin and Old Norse, I'm afraid. Like me. Freyja stared at the girl. She's a gargoyle like you. No, she's the witch who made us into gargoyles. And him into whatever he is. Odin gestured at the strange man with the hairy hands. The girl said something, then looked expectantly at Odin. She says she's finished healing your friend. Now she needs to rest and eat. Freyja nodded, then turned to her patient. Beneath the oxygen mask, Sybil's lips were losing their bluish tint. She peeled back the wound dressing, only to find no wound there anymore. She looked up to find the girl's knowing eyes on her. The girl inclined her head, which Freyja took to mean, "You're welcome." She says she hopes you have plenty of food because after that, she could eat a whole dragon, Odin said. Definitely not a gargoyle then. Freyja led the way to the cafeteria. 45. While the women ate their meal, Odin stood against the wall of the feasting hall, waiting to see if he'd be needed as an interpreter. The wolfman imitated him, though now he looked fully human again, as he watched over the witch. He definitely took his bodyguard duties seriously. A hand tapped Odin's shoulder. Loki. Can I talk to you for a minute? Odin's eyes never left the women's table. Sure, but it'll have to be here. I'm not leaving Freyja alone with that wolfman here. It's the witch I'm worried about. If she does anything to Jaran. Loki in love. Odin never thought he'd see the day. What do you wish to discuss? Odin asked. He hoped it wouldn't be marital advice. It's about the things Eric said, and what happened when I left you all in the past to go scouting. I need to know if you believed him, that I was a traitor. Eric was a bag of piss and wind. I'd sooner believe what came out of a wolverine's ass than anything that came out of his mouth. I know you. You'd happily turn Thor's hammer into a fish or my spear into a sausage, but you would never turn on your brothers in arms. Every prank you played, you were only too happy to admit you were responsible, so we could all laugh with you. Yes, you have your secrets, as do we all, but you never kept them from me. Loki breathed out a sigh of relief. You don't know how happy I am to hear that. I sneaked into Eric's camp in the hope of killing him, but the witch caught me and kept me from returning to you. I didn't even know you'd survived until the night she cut out our hearts. I figured if I was the last of us, I owed it to you all to stay and find a way to kill Eric, and take away his family. His sons. Odin's eyebrows rose. So it was not the traitor Orm who poisoned them, but you? Loki ducked his head. Fate played a part. It was almost as if fate wanted those men to die. Many men died that day. I still do not understand why we were not among them, Odin admitted. Truly, I believed we were all marching to our deaths. That is why, when you went out scouting and did not return, we marched anyway. Because I knew Eric's men would be waiting, but I knew our men were not willing to wait any longer for vengeance. Even if it killed us all. He sighed. The only traitor on the field that day was me, for it didn't matter what I did. I would betray my men by leading them into battle, or I would betray the memory of those who died by running away. Only to be captured by Eric, and offered a choice, the lives of my remaining men if I agreed to serve him. I believed he would let you live, not that he would turn you into a drawer as he had me. Odin shook his head. He was a faithless liar to the last. I hope that man Orm did kill him and that his death was slow. He does not appear in the history books of this time, so it seems the world has forgotten Eric, while we still live on. It is done, Thor roared as he stomped into the feasting hall. What have you done now? Loki asked, eyeing Thor's snow-covered boots. The strange metal thing that slayed Sybil is no more. I have shredded it into pieces so small they scattered on the wind, Thor said. You've destroyed the sundial? Freyja said, half rising from her seat. Odin winced. He will see it forged anew for you, I promise. Freyja sat down again. It doesn't matter. I never liked it anyway. I'm sure it was insured. We'll say it was carried away by the storm. I'm sure the university can afford to commission a new one. Or get some new art to put in its place. The witch set down her can of beer and belched. Now I have eaten, I will have some answers. Tell me, where is my father, Eric of Utgard? Loki and Odin exchanged glances. Well, Loki began. Odin cleared his throat. We believe he was stabbed by a man named Orm. The witch's eyes blazed. Where is he? I shall slay the man myself. It might be a bit late for that, Loki said. Take me to him, the witch insisted. Freyja rose. What's her problem now? She wants to see your ice mummy, Odin said. As long as she doesn't touch him, I guess we can do that, Freyja said. In the cold storage room, it was not Orm's body, but the stone tablet that held the witch's attention. She even laughed. It is true. The man had no honor, yet my father tried to give me to him. Fenrir was right to take me away, though I did not believe it at first. She tossed the tablet back onto the table. What will you do with him? Odin translated her question for Freyja, who replied, We will scan him and learn as much as we can from him. Scholars will study his body inside and out, so that we may increase our knowledge about the people of your time. When the witch heard this, she only laughed harder. Oh, that is a fitting fate for a traitor. Not even as a corpse will he know rest. I'm sorry about your father and your brothers, Odin said. Not that he felt Eric was any great loss to the world, but he had been the girl's father. And to lose her brothers, too. The witch waved away his sympathies. I had many brothers. My father lay with a different woman each night, and had many sons. All of them wished to prove themselves worthy of his notice, so they took many risks during battle, drinking far too much jusquiasmus than was good for them. There was no antidote if they took too much, which they often did. They lived and died as warriors, and the next day, father would find more to fill their places. He never bothered to claim any of his daughters, except me, because I had magic. He was my father, but he only cared that I was useful to him. First as a witch, then as a wife to keep Orm loyal, which must have failed when Fenrir took me. Come, we must drink to justice, which finally caught up with the traitor. When the witch was seated in the cafeteria once more, with a fresh beer in her hand, Odin dared to breathe a sigh of relief. Freyja's ice mummy was safe, and so were they, for the moment. But none of you have answered my question. Where is my father, Eric of Utgard? The witch demanded. 46. Eric of Utgard was buried far from here, in a lavish boat burial, together with a runestone that told the story of his conquests. It mentioned the pass where we have been digging as the route to Utgard, which is why I joined the expedition, Sybil said hoarsely as she staggered into the feasting hall, using the wall for support. Freyja jumped to her feet. You shouldn't be up. Sybil waved her away. I am fine. She healed me. She pointed at the witch, then switched from English back to halting Old Norse. I owe you a debt of gratitude, lady. My name is Astrid, and your answer is payment enough. My creatures were responsible for your injury, so it was only fitting that I heal it. And I am repaid. Did you see my father's body lying in state? The witch asked. Sybil shook her head. There were only bones left, and I have seen pictures of them. I can show you if you like. Thor moved to support her, but she flapped a hand at him. Just help me sit down, then go get my laptop. And you are going to promise me never to fight with that bloke ever again, or so help me, you are going to learn about divorce. Thor's eyes widened and he hurried out. Sybil turned her hard gaze on Astrid. Now you and I need to get one thing straight. That one is my creature. He's handfasted to me, and if you think you can just wave your hands and make him follow you like a well-trained puppy, we are going to have words, and they will not be nice ones. Odin tensed, ready to step forward to defend Sybil in Thor's absence for saying such unwise words to a witch. Astrid tilted her head. You woke him. That is why they were not in the mountains, where I left them. Thor answered your call and resisted mine. Is it the same for the others? Do they serve the other women? Sybil swallowed. I think so, yes. My cousin Callie sent me some information about gargoyles, and how they are protectors. She even sent me the spell for creating them, though I couldn't imagine cutting out anyone's heart. She shuddered. Astrid's smile was tight. It is quite messy, especially as you cannot reach it without breaking some bones. Very unpleasant. If my father had not commanded it, I never would have done it once, let alone many times. How many? Odin asked. Too many, Fenrir said. I was her first, and I will protect her to the last. Odin digested this for a moment. He knew it was unwise to ask, but he had to know. With your father and brothers dead, all of these creatures answer to you now. What do you intend to do with your Dra army? Astrid shuddered. My father's army, not mine. I must release them. Thor walked in and handed a strange flat device to Sybil. Who else are you holding prisoner? Astrid closed her eyes. Countless gargoyles, protectors cursed to answer my father's call. I must release them. Fenrir stepped forward. I shall help you and protect you as always. But I should release you too. I asked for this. I swore to protect you, and I will. We stand together. But these others, you should release them. Let them seek happiness with the mortal women of this time. Thor stepped up to stand right in front of Fenrir. You only want that because you want me weaker, so you can win. Fenrir shrugged. I take no pleasure in fighting. I am Astrid's loyal bodyguard. I fought to defend her, and at her father's command. If Eric is truly dead, then I only answer to Astrid now, and she was most displeased at having to heal you the first time. If you are no threat to her, then I have no argument with you. You killed my sister. Fenrir frowned. I have never killed a woman in my life. Boys maybe, when they take up weapons against me. There was one boy in a village on the coast once, ferocious fighter. A little like you, for he would not surrender, even when he knew he had lost. With his last breath, he demanded I send him to Valhalla. Now I think of it, he had a weapon like yours too, though he could barely lift it. My sister, dressed in boy's garb, Thor said through gritted teeth. If I had known, I would have spared her. I am sorry for your loss. But I can assure you, she earned her place in Valhalla. Perhaps even among the Valkyrie. Yes, Thor said. Give up the grudge or get a divorce, Thor. I'm not going through that again, Sybil said. Shake hands with the werewolf or whatever he is. Thor squeezed his eyes shut, then held out his hand. I, Thor, Hymir's son, swear I will never harm Miss Astrid, as long as you will swear never again to harm my Sybil. It is agreed, Fenrir said, gripping Thor's arm in the way of warriors. What about them then? Sybil asked. Fenrir frowned. What do you mean? She said she'd free them. Slavery is illegal in this time, and you have no idea how much trouble you'll get into for it. So free them. Take the curse off Thor and Odin and Loki. Do that, and I'll show you those pictures. Maybe even hook you up with some of my contacts, who might know where you can find other gargoyles too. Sybil said. Fenrir's frown deepened. You wish to hook me like a fish? Or Astrid? Sybil just shook her head. Some things just don't translate. Astrid, will you set these men free? Astrid smiled. Yes. For to undo my father's work is to set myself free also. 47. Dr. Freyja Valdis? Freyja forced out a smile as she held the door open wider for the small crowd outside. That's me. Please come in. Ingrid, the only woman among them, shook hands with her before sidling inside, followed by the two police officers and an older man Freyja assumed was the university photographer. Can you show us where the body was found? One of the police asked. Freyja couldn't help it, she laughed. I can show you pictures of the dig site in the mountains where it was found, and the preliminary X-rays I took this morning. Now the power's back on, but if you want to see the dig site, you'll have to wait for Jakob and his pack horses, and when they do their next supply run in a few days. Unless you can get approval to send in another helicopter. But you'd best talk to Carl, the expedition leader, before you do that. Conditions up there can be very different to the weather we get here. The police officers held a muttered exchange in Norwegian that Freyja didn't understand. Finally, one of them nodded. Show us the body then. Freyja led them to the necropsy lab, swiped the door open and headed for the fridge. She threw open the door just as she had for Thor, Loki and the others, but this time she knew exactly what she'd find. Orm had not moved since she'd X-rayed him, and Astrid has assured her that unlike Odin, he was definitely dead. Ingrid's photographer was in there first, snapping photos of the body in the fridge, while the police officers pulled on protective clothing. Freyja just stood back and watched. She had a forensics degree herself, so there was nothing the police would discover that she didn't already know. Orm belonged in an archaeology lab, not in the hands of a police coroner. Finally, one of the men peeled off his mask, then his gloves. "Not a police matter. You can keep him," he said. So they'd missed a few details, had they? That's what we thought. Even if he was murdered or executed, we estimate it was over 1,000 years ago, so there isn't much chance of catching the killer. The ultimate cold case, Freyja said. The talkative one stared at her. Murdered? How can you be sure? Freyja pulled on her own pair of gloves, then delicately pulled aside a fold of Orm's shirt, revealing the knife buried in his guts. Well, there's this, which indicated he probably died a slow, agonizing death, and there's also the runestone that was found with him, that describes the crimes he was executed for. An example of early Norwegian justice at work. Both officers grinned at that. Then they were asked to pose for pictures, though with their faces hidden, before they insisted they needed to get back. After the police left, Freyja wheeled the body out into the necropsy lab, where the photographer could make use of better lighting and more space to take more photos and video of the body, before she returned it to the fridge and had to answer a lot of questions from Ingrid on what she'd learned about Orm. Freyja found herself repeating plenty of variations of, "I don't know yet," until Ingrid was finally satisfied and put her laptop away. If any of the reporters who received the press release wanted to ask further questions, they would contact Freyja, Ingrid said. Freyja wished she could refuse, but Carl's discovery deserved all the press coverage she could get. Even if it was Orm, and not Odin. Speaking of Odin, where was he? 48. A white boxy cart, much larger than the vehicles Freyja's visitors had arrived in, trundled up the road, past the main building and round the back, to where the courtyard was still filled with snow. A man got out of the cart and swore. "Who is that?" Thor asked. Sybil shrugged. "I have no idea. He looks like is headed for the shed where the waste barrels are kept, but they don't get collected until the end of the season. It's cheaper for the university to only pay for one truck trip, because the truck needs special waste permits. There aren't any signs on the outside of that van, so I doubt he's here officially. You should go ask him." "Me?" Odin asked. "Sure. You're Olaf the caretaker, or at least that's what it says on your overalls," Sybil said. But Freyja had said to stay out of everyone's way, until the police left. She wouldn't like this. "He's wearing the same thing," Odin said, pointing at Thor. Sybil raised her eyes to the ceiling. "Fine. Both of you go and ask him, then. Ask if he needs any help." Odin trudged into the courtyard, almost wishing Astrid hadn't broken the curse, so that the snow wouldn't slow him down like it did now. Did they not have snowshoes in this time? He hailed the man. The man definitely looked furtive then, like he was looking for a quick escape. "I'm Olaf, the caretaker here. Can I help you?" Odin asked, hearing Thor's footsteps behind him. "This is Thor." For Odin might be able to maintain a pretend identity, but Thor was too forthright for such things. The man bared his teeth in a smile that definitely didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Thrym, here to pick up the waste. It's usually in this building." He pointed at the shed Sybil had mentioned. Of course. We'll help you carry the barrels across the snow. You should have come later, when the snow melts, and it would be easier. But it doesn't matter. We will help you," Odin said, heading for the shed. He lifted the nearest barrel, and carried it out. "Where would you like me to put it?" Thrym's eyes widened. "Oh, I don't need all of them. Just the marked ones. Someone else will come for the others." "What sort of mark?" Odin asked, examining the barrel. There were many marks around it. Thor emerged from the shed. "Like this one." His barrel bore his family rune. Thrym looked relieved. "Yes. The ones with the old runes on them. Nick's little joke." Thor's face turned thunderous. You are only taking those marked with ancient runes? Not the rest? Yes. Thrym opened the rear door of his cart. You can put that one in here. Odin set his barrel down at Thor's feet. I'll do it. You put this one back inside with the rest. I'll meet you back in the shed, and show you which ones we want. Thor looked like he wanted to argue, but he'd always been as loyal and obedient as he was forthright. He might not like it, but he obeyed. Odin set the barrel inside the cart, and hurried after Thor. You can't let him take these. He's a thief, Thor hissed the moment Odin entered the shed. I know. You and Sybil told me they hid your hammer in one of these, Odin said, lifting another barrel. You don't understand. Sybil told me to put it back in a barrel, that barrel, the one you loaded into his cart, Thor said. We can't allow him to take it. No, they could not. Freyja had said the police, people whose job it was to mete out justice in this world, were here. She'd feared they would accuse her of theft. But if there really was a thief here... I have a plan. Pick up one of the marked barrels and follow me, Odin said. But... I said follow me. Odin shouted. Thor muttered under his breath, but he did as he was told. Odin climbed up into the cart. Now pass that up here to me. We can't. I said lift up that barrel. Odin roared. I heard you. I just don't think we should, Thor shouted back. Give it to me. You're a fool. And you're an idiot. Give me that barrel. Odin bellowed, loud enough to wake the dead. Thor lifted it, but was reluctant to let go. This is wrong. He slammed the barrel down on the ground, so the lid flew off. But Thor didn't notice, he was too busy climbing into the cart. He grabbed the barrels already inside, and proceeded to toss them out onto the ground too. This is a valuable historical artifact, and it should be locked away safe, not smuggled out to be stolen, Thor boomed, picking up his hammer from the smashed barrel. Everybody put your hands up. Thor grinned, lifting his hammer in both hands, only to drop it on Thrym's feet. Odin had never heard such a shrill scream from a man before. But anyone who tried to steal Thor's hammer surely deserved their fate. What's going on out here? That was Freyja, looking as thunderous as the sky on the night they'd met. Sybil and Jorun were with her. These men appear to have been fighting, one of the policemen said. We heard shouting and then saw this mess. Odin moved closer to Freyja, his hand still held high. This man said he was here to collect the waste barrels. As I am the caretaker here, I came to help him, but the barrel fell and this was inside. He gestured at the hammer, that had definitely done some damage to the man's feet. Sybil stepped forward. That hammer should be in the artifact room. You were trying to steal priceless artifacts. She pointed at Thrym. Not me. Dr. Fridolfsson pays me to collect the waste. Just waste. Thrym babbled. Freyja folded her arms across her chest. Nick Fridolfsson isn't in charge here. I am. And I did not authorize any waste collection or movement of artifacts from the facility. Arrest this man as Nick's accomplice. The policemen looked bewildered. What about the other men? They are my staff. They were aware of Dr. Fridolfsson's arrest, and I'd asked them to keep an eye out for anyone suspicious on the property, particularly if they were attempting to remove anything from the facility. It looks like that's exactly what they did here. Tried to stop him from stealing these waste containers that definitely didn't contain waste. Thor. Odin. Is that what was happening here? Odin nodded. Of course, Dr. Valdis. As you see, we were right to be suspicious. After some arguing, the policemen took Thrym and his vehicle with them, along with a large number of pictures of the broken barrels and artifacts, but none of the actual artifacts, because Freyja was insistent that no police evidence locker was equipped to properly preserve priceless cultural treasures, whereas the facilities at IceLab were designed to do just that. When one of the policemen suggested that the lab might not be secure, she merely shrugged and said the contents of the barrels couldn't have come from inside IceLab, as the barrels were sealed at the dig site and remained sealed until disposed of by the waste contractor, because of the risks of transferring some unknown pathogen from the ice. Even she wouldn't handle the contents of those barrels without a hazmat suit. The policemen backed off in a hurry, leaving Thor and Odin to clean up the mess, while Sibyl and Jorunn took care of the artifacts. Ingrid and her photographer headed off too, chattering in rapid Norwegian about the press coverage they hoped to get for this story. "I can't believe we finally caught them. Such incredible luck that Nick's accomplice came here while the police were here. Carl's been trying to work out how things have been going missing for years now. If Nick had gone to Egypt this year, like he'd originally planned, we might never have figured out it was him," Freyja said. Jorunn shrugged. "Saint Nick probably contacted him as soon as he could, only Thrym couldn't get here until the roads were cleared. If he had gone to Saqqara instead, hopefully his colleagues in Egypt would have found him out before too much went missing. And I've heard the penalties for theft there, especially valuable antiquities, are a whole lot harsher than here in Norway. Oh well. At least he won't be stealing stuff again in a hurry." Or the other guy. Did Thor really crush both of the poor man's feet with his hammer? "I dropped it," Thor said, looking aggrieved. "I should have swung it at him instead and broken more than just his feet." "Then you really would have lost your hammer," Sibyl said. "If you'd killed a man with it, the police would have arrested you and taken away the murder weapon as evidence. So it's a good thing you only dropped it. Now we know it'll stay safe here." The others headed inside, but Odin and Freyja lingered in the courtyard. The melting snow had washed away Sibyl's blood, leaving no sign of Thor and Fenrir's fight, aside from the broken sundial that Freyja had already informed the university had been damaged by the blizzard. "Did everything go well with Orm and the policemen?" Odin asked. Freyja smiled. "Yes, of course. They were just leaving when we heard shouting, and came out here to investigate. You're lucky the police didn't look too deeply into your background. Sibyl said she has a cousin back home who might be able to help you get some identity documents so you, Thor and Loki can pass for modern men. It will take some time though. In the meantime I will stay here with you as your maintenance man," Odin declared. Freyja laughed. "Oh, I hope you'll be a lot more than that." 49. Freyja sat down in the cafeteria and opened up her laptop. It felt like forever since she'd last talked to her family, but in reality it had only been a few weeks. She tried calling earlier, but this was the first time everyone's rosters had lined up enough to have everyone home. "Of course," Mum answered. "Hello, darling. How is the iceman doing?" Freyja blinked. She hadn't told them about Odin, how could they possibly know? Finton's face popped up behind Mum's shoulder. "Mum's been following every news story and article she can find on your iceman since she first saw you being interviewed on the news. Even at my work, people were asking if I was related to you. You're famous." Oh, they meant Orm, not Odin. "Well, he's definitely dead. It's still early days yet. Forensics isn't as fast as it looks on the TV programs. Sometimes it takes weeks to get the test results back, and my team here is quite small. When the summer dig season is over, some of the archaeologists will join me, and we'll find out more then, plus write up some papers to put out to all the right journals. So far, all we know for sure is that he was from the Viking era. With Ingrid's help, they'd managed to keep the runestone out of the news coverage, as that's the first thing Freyja and Sibyl intended to write a paper about, linking this discovery with the runestone from Eric's grave that had sent Sybil to this site in the first place. "We're so proud of you, darling. I knew you weren't entirely happy in medicine, but I always thought you'd find your feet while you were traveling. I never thought you'd be making historic discoveries over there," Mum said. Freyja's heart blossomed in her chest. After so many years feeling she was a failure, it was nice to be praised for once. Wait, Mum had known she wasn't happy. "Ugh, enough about dead guys. I want to hear about the hot, live ones. You never did send me any pictures," Kendall complained, dropping to her knees beside Mum's chair. Mum shot Kendall an annoyed look. "We are all very proud of your sister. She's out there, making a name for herself, instead of chasing men every moment." "Patience, Mum. Most of those men are my patients," Kendall said, rolling her eyes. Even from the other side of the world, Freyja knew that was a lie. Fraternizing with patients, much like necrophilia, was definitely not considered appropriate conduct for a doctor. "You speak to your sister. I need to get dinner started," Mum declared, getting up. Kendall slid into Mum's seat. "Right. I want to hear everything. Please don't tell me you've been so busy with the dead guy, you haven't had time for any live ones. There's no point you going all the way to Norway, unless you claim some mighty Viking cock." Odin wandered into the cafeteria, carrying a plate with a muffin topped with lingonberry jam. "Who are you speaking to? Who is that?" Kendall squealed. Freyja closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "Odin, this is my sister, Kendall, video calling from Australia, on the other side of the world. She has an unhealthy obsession with men's genitals, as if she doesn't already see enough of them at work. Kendall, this is... I am Odin. My mighty Viking cock belongs to Dr. Freyja Valdis, and no one else." Freyja wanted to slide under the table in embarrassment. Kendall let out another squeal. "You have a boyfriend? Does he always talk dirty like that? God, he's hot. Why didn't you send me pictures?" Freyja began to tell her sister about getting snowed in, but Odin began to kiss her neck, and suddenly, Freyja realized she couldn't continue without telling her sister everything. Gargoyles and witches and werewolves, much like Odin's private parts, they weren't something she wanted to share with her sister. "You know what? I gotta go. You have a great week, and give everyone a hug for me. Maybe when the pandemic's over and the borders open, I'll come home again, and Odin can come with me. Meanwhile, we have work to do," Freyja said, letting the cursor hover over the end call button. "But I want to see his..." The screen went dark. "So now it's just you and me here," Odin began. "Is it? I know Sybil and Geran and their boys left with Jakob and the supplies, but I thought Astrid and Fenrir were coming back. They had to go free some more gargoyles," they said. She wanted to free all of them. All the men she'd cursed. But she cut out hundreds of hearts, and she said it would take more than a few days to track them down. Especially as they would be walking, instead of using magic to travel, which is apparently what they used last time. Eric wanted to conquer the whole world, and he wanted armies everywhere, ready to help him. Odin shook his head. "We should be grateful to Orm for ending his ambitions when he did. And to Astrid for freeing all the warriors he enslaved. She said she would return to winter with us before the first snows fell, whether she had finished freeing them all or not. I promised she and Fenrir could celebrate Yule with us. And the others, if they wish it." Freyja rose. "So it's just us here, and I've finished work for the day. Whatever shall we do?" Odin grinned. "Well, I have a mighty Viking cock that is eager to do as you command. Let's start with your dirty Viking mouth and those calloused Viking hands first. Then if you are lucky, I'll ride that mighty cock of yours." She'd thought his amazing stamina was part of the enchantment, but he'd since proved that he could happily go all night, even as a man. And what a man! I am yours to command, as always, Dr. Freyja. She held out her hand. How about we go to bed then, Iceman? I might have spent most of the week working on a different Viking body, but it's yours I want to get my hands on now. Odin laughed, ignoring her outstretched hand as he scooped her up in his arms. Then the faster I get you to bed, the sooner I will be able to grant your wish, beloved. All your wishes. As their clothes drifted to the floor like snowflakes, Freyja took a moment to wonder if all her wishes had already come true. Then she was naked in bed with Odin, and she only had one wish for more. So he granted that one too. This has been Odin, a Paranormal Protector Tale. Book 3 in the Heart of Ice series. Written by Demelza Carlton.